May I request everyone to be seated, please? The Vice-Chancellor is on his way here. Also requesting you to kindly keep your phones on silent mode or airplane mode so that we can enjoy the conference without any distractions. Thank you. Oh, east is east, and west is west, and never the twain shall meet. While Rudyard Kipling's iconic lines were intended to establish just the opposite, we cannot help but reflect on the sentiments expressed in these lines on a day like today, when we're gathered here in sunny Goa to celebrate the confluence of cultures and academia from the East and the West. A very good morning to each of you and a warm welcome to the two-day international conference on India-Portugal, Confluence of Cultures, brought to you by the SHENOI GOEMBAB School of Languages and Literature and School of Sanskrit, Philosophy and Indic Studies, Goa University, in collaboration with Macmillan Center's Council on Latin American and Iberian Studies, Yale University, and JOAQUIM HELIODORO the CUNHA RIVARA Chair, Visiting Research Professors Program, Goa University. To formally begin today's proceedings, may I request Mr. Dhruv Gaonkar to escort the dignitaries to the dais. It is my privilege to invite the Honorable Vice-Chancellor of Goa University, Senior Professor Harilal B. Menon, who will be presiding over the inaugural segment. The convener of this conference, Professor Kenneth David Jackson, the co-conveners, Professor Anuradha Wagle, Dean SHENOI GOEMBAB School of Languages and Literature, and Professor Koshi Tarakkan, Dean School of International and Area Studies. Let's give them another warm round of applause, please. Thank you, sirs. Thank you, ma'am. We would also like to acknowledge the presence of the director of Fundação Oriente, Mr. Paulo Gomes. in our midst. Thank you for gracing the occasion with us. From a little spark may burst a flame. Through these words, Dante may well have been describing the kind of spark that ignites ideas that could potentially grow into a conference of international proportions. To symbolize and celebrate the flame of dialogue, intellectual discourse, and cultural collaboration, may I invite the Honorable Vice-Chancellor, Professor Harilal B. Menon, to lead the ceremonial lighting of the lamp. And may I request the luminaries on the dais to join him, please. I also invite Mr. Paolo Gomes to join them on the dais, please. Thank you, everyone. May I invite Professor Anuradha Wagle, Dean of SHENOI GOEMBAB School of Languages and Literature and co-convener of this conference, to formally welcome the gathering.
Honorable Vice-Chancellor of Goa University, Senior Professor Harilal B. Menon, Dr. Kenneth David Jackson, Professor of Luso-Brazilian Literature at Yale University and the keynote speaker for today, Professor Koshi Tarakan, Dean of the School of Sanskrit, Philosophy and Indic Studies, my colleague Dhruv Usgaonkar, Program Director of the MA program of the Discipline of Portuguese and Lusophone Studies, Vice Deans of the SHENOI GOEMBAB School of Languages and Literature, Professor Vrishali Mandrekar and Professor Prakash Pariyakar, distinguished professors and resource persons from Yale, Lisbon, and Toronto, who have traveled all the way to Goa today to participate in this seminar. Along with Dr. Jackson, we have with us Dr. Janardhan Gonari, Dr. Rosa Maria Perez, Dr. Edward S. Cook, Dr. Hugo Cardoz, Dr. Elizabeth Jackson, and Dr. Inez Lacerda. Also, a warm welcome to Dr. Cecilia Carvalho, Professor Anil Kumar Yadav, Professor Subramaniam, who have joined us from different parts of this country. Resource persons and paper readers from outside Goa, and our very own scholars from across the state who are presenting papers and participating in the panel discussions. Fellow colleagues from Goa University, dear students, ladies and gentlemen. It is with great pleasure that I welcome you all to the inaugural of the two-day international seminar on the theme, India-Portugal Confluence of Cultures, co-organized by the SHENOI GOEMBAB School of Languages and Literature and the School of Sanskrit, Philosophy and Indic Studies of Goa University, in collaboration with the Macmillan Center Council on Latin American and Iberian Studies, Yale University, and the JOAQUIM HELIODORO, the CUNHA RIVARA Chair, Visiting Research Professors Program of Goa University. It was exactly 1 year ago, Dr. Jackson, when we met during the seminar organized during the VRPP visit of Professor Ganeri in Goa. It was exactly 1 year ago, January of 2024. And it was at this time that the seed for this seminar was sown. After a team of our young faculty in Goa University across the languages and the School of Philosophy mobilized themselves to put this event together. I think Mr. Uzgaonkar and his team have done a commendable effort in putting this program together, and I thank them for their tireless efforts in organizing the seminar. This seminar has been organized to bring together scholars, researchers, and cultural enthusiasts to discuss and understand the deep and enduring connections between India and Portugal, Indian and Portuguese culture, to celebrate and critically engage with the cultural exchanges that have shaped both the societies over the centuries. This seminar will cover a wide range of topics, including the cultural legacy and influence of the Portuguese presence in India, intersections in language, art, and culinary traditions, philosophical exchanges between India and Portugal, comparative insights into Goan and Portuguese literature, and all this through the expertise of our distinguished speakers and panelists from India, Portugal, and North America. The seminar also includes presentations by our young and enthusiastic researchers to provide fresh perspectives on the shared histories and cultural intersections of India and Portugal. More importantly, it aims at promoting research among our students and researchers in Goa, on the themes which are going to be discussed here in an interdisciplinary perspective. And for this, these two schools have come together, and I think this is the first, this should be the first of many other such initiatives. To complement the academic sessions, we also have some cultural events, a film screening, exhibitions, and displays, which will display the unique blend of Indian and Portuguese traditions. And of course, at the end of this two-day seminar, we also have the one-day a day-long series, rather, of master classes, which we have organized in the seminar hall of Goa University, Block B, where our experts will be, talking to our students, interacting with them, and also with the public who have registered for these sessions. This will be, at the end of the day of the masterclass, we will have the staging of an abridged version of Orlando de Costa's acclaimed Portuguese play, No Flowers, No Wreaths, which has been translated into English by Dr. Isabel de Santa Rita Vaz, who's here today, and who's also one of our participants who will also be reading a paper. And this performance is a collaborative effort between the SHENOI GOEMBAB School of Languages and Literature and the Mustard Seed Art Company. And this will take place at 4:30. I'm just giving this little information, 4:30 p.m. in the chemistry auditorium for all those who are interested, and please spread the word. So this seminar, along with its associated master classes and cultural events, promises to be a vibrant celebration of the enduring ties between India and Portugal, offering rich opportunities for cultural and intellectual exchange and collaboration. I wish all our participants an excellent seminar. Thank you, dhanyavad, obrigada, Deus barekoru.
Thank you, Professor Wagle. May I now request the Honorable Vice Chancellor of Goa University, Senior Professor Harilal B. Menon, to deliver the presidential address.
Good morning. Professor Kenneth David Jackson, my colleague Professor Anuradha, Professor Koshi, all other esteemed invitees, experts in the field of Indo-Portuguese, cultural studies present here, my own colleagues who are present here, and here I could see the faculty members from different schools. That is actually the gist of national education policy. Because this is what I was always longing to see, that the faculty members from different schools and different disciplines come together and then discuss something which could finally evolve into something which you never think in the past or never thought in the past. So that is what is now happening. In fact, when you say the today's conference, like Indo-Portuguese and the cultural confluence, if you look at the binding between India and Portugal, these bindings are on the basis of intellectual binding, cultural, and then history. And this also, as Professor Anuradha said in her welcome speech, that this endured the time, and then this is the time that, in fact, if you look at the present era, what we need is that inclusivity, because we have the diversity and then inclusivity. That is the need of the hour. Therefore, we have a history of Indo-Portuguese relation around 400, 500 years. And what was the positive aspects of that? That needs to be discussed at length. In fact, I'm delighted to see that very eminent personalities are sitting here. If you look at the history between India and Portugal, it's basically the cultural intermingling. Whether it is the Vasco da Gama sea routing to India, or it's a cuisine, or it is the architecture, all that thing have put an indelible mark in India's large portrait, and same way India's tradition back. Therefore, it's a time that, and when you look at the kind of technological advancement, but we know that the whole world is coming like a village, and what India for the rest of the world is that Vasudhaiva Kudumbakam, because we always look in terms of friends and our own brothers and sisters across. We never have anything like someone, we only have to come up, others should not. So that kind of an approach we never had. So in that respect, this, the conference will certainly, help, and especially the experts in the field are here. And recently when the Mumbai Consulate General came down to Goa, he happened to come to meet me. Some of the things he told me was very, very surprising to me. He said that the Germany is looking for 1 million technologically oriented Indians. In fact, over the world scenario, when you see, the main competition is between Indian students and Chinese students. But the advantage of Indian students is that they would be able to speak, communicate properly. So therefore, they said the Germans prefer Indian students there. Same way, so therefore this kind of a dialogue will certainly help. And one more thing he told me, that in Germany, none of them want to become a priest in any of the Catholic Church. All the priests in Catholic Church in Germany are from India. So in that respect, when you see that this kind of a workshop, I always encourage this kind of a conference, this kind of a workshop, often, quite often, so that whatever distance if you have, if you feel that there is a distance between these two countries, that can be narrowed down, and we will have more and more understanding, because what is required is that global harmony. What is going on across the world, like Ukraine or Palestine or in all that, that is not what we want. The generation wants peace, generation wants to work hard. In fact, the younger generation really is ready to work. They are all workaholic. All the younger generations are really workaholic. But it is the responsibility of the rulers to create space for that. So for that, I really thank the organizers like Professor Anuradha and her team to organize such a conference. And I'm sure that in the coming 2 days there will be fruitful discussions on the Indo-Portuguese history and culture, all that. And that will certainly create a kind of cultural mosaic, global cultural mosaic. That is the need of the hour. Because this is the time that, you know, one of my colleagues say that, sir, tomorrow I'm going to London or I'm going here. Because as I said earlier, the distance is becoming so narrow that you can even go, in future you may find that you can go somewhere which you never you know, expect to reach in 24 hours. You can even reach in 1 or 2 hours and come back. So that is the kind of the technological advancements is going on. Therefore, I appreciate, I congratulate the School of SHENOI GOEMBAB School of Language and Literature, and of course the School of Sanskrit, Philosophy and Indic Knowledge Studies. It is, you know, Indic Knowledge Studies, when you say that, I happen to see one of the articles written by a professor from American University, where he says that most of the schools in America are teaching Gita. In that there is one sloga that Karmanya Vadigairiste Ma Phaleshukatashana. Actually, as a child, I never knew what is the meaning of that. Now I realize that you do your job, your karma. Don't expect anything in back. That will come automatically, because when you do that, that's what I meant by workaholic students, workaholic younger generation. So the responsibility of the rulers is that to create a space for that. So to do karma, we have to have a proper space. Thank you so much. And once again, I thank both the schools for organizing this conference, and let there be fruitful discussion. And at the end of the day, let me say that, see, 2 days means 48 hours, almost 48 hours. Of course, out of that, you may spend around 9 hours each or 10 hours each, so 20 hours, let's say. So 20 hours, you know, spending should be fruitful, so that you should be able to draw a trajectory that what needs to be done next. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Menon, for your constant support and encouragement for such initiatives. As we wrap up this inaugural segment, I invite Mr. Dhruv Usgaonkar, Program Director of the MA Program, Discipline of Portuguese, SHENOI GOEMBAB School of Languages and Literature, to propose the vote of thanks.
No. The world's best and most beautiful things cannot be seen or touched. They must be felt from the heart. Thank you is one such prayer among them. I consider it a great privilege to propose the vote of thanks to all those whose effort, support, and collaboration have made this conference possible. On behalf of the SHENOI GOEMBAB School of Languages and Literature, I would like to thank Professor Kenneth David Jackson from Yale University, the convener of this conference, for taking the initiative to have this event at Goa University, and for all his efforts in assuring the collaboration with Yale University for this conference. I express my gratitude to the Yale Macmillan Center, Council on Latin American Iberian Studies, for co-sponsoring this conference, and to Ms. Paula Martel for making the arrangements for the travel of not only Professor Jackson, but also Professor Janardhan Ganeri, Professor Edward Cook, Professor Rosa Maria Perez, and Ms. Inês Forjas de Lacerda. Thank you all. A special thanks also to Professor Hugo Cardozo for accepting our invitation and gracing the conference with his presence. I convey my regards to all the speakers, panel chairs, and moderators of the conference who have accepted our invitation and taken out time from their busy schedules to be with us today. We look forward to your participation in the conference. My deepest gratitude to our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Senior Professor Harilal B. Menon, and our Registrar, Professor V.S. Nadkarni, for supporting us in the organization of this conference. My sincere thanks to the Dean of SHENOI GOEMBAB School of Languages and Literature, Professor Anuradha Wagle, for constant guidance and support throughout. Professor Koshi Tharakan, Dean of the School of Sanskrit, Philosophy and Indic Studies, for his support. Dr. Prakash Parekar, Director of the Visiting Research Professors Program, VRPP, and the 2 collaborating chairs of the VRPP, the J.H. CUNHA RIVARA Chair, Camões IP, and the Anthony Gonsalves Chair in Western Classical Music. The CUNHA RIVARA Chair has sponsored the travel and stay of Professor Hugo Cardoso, and the stay of Professor Rosa Maria Pérez, while the Anthony Gonsalves Chair has sponsored the concert by Ms. Sonia Sirsat that will take place tomorrow. Thank you, Dr. Prakash, for making this possible. I would also like to thank Ms. Sonia Sirsat for accepting our invitation to perform tomorrow after the conference, and to Mr. Vince Costa for permitting us to screen his film Sastizo Cordo at the end of today's proceedings. A special thanks to Mr. Leonard Fernandez of Dog Ears Bookstore, Mr. Vaibhav Salgaonkar of Art by Boo, and Ms. Neha Naik of the Kunbi community who have set up their stalls outside this hall. A special mention to Ms. Neha Naik for the beautiful mementos that will be presented at the conference. Thanks also to our hospitality partner, Panjimin, and to Siddharthi Goa for hosting the post-conference reception. At this juncture, I would also like to thank Professor Isabel Vaz and a Mustard Seed team for the play No Flowers, No Wreaths, which will be staged on the 8th of January after the master classes. An event of this dimension cannot happen overnight. The wheels start rolling much in advance. We have been fortunate enough to be backed by a motivated and dedicated team. I cannot thank enough the steering committee, Ms. Lorraine Alberto, Mr. Francho Botcotta, Ms. Rochelle Fernandez, Ms. Jemima Fernandez, Dr. Chinmay Ghaisas, Ms. Sanika Gaonkar, and Ms. Mamta Verlekar. My sincere gratitude to the other faculty members, Ms. Jeanette Barbosa Noronha, Ms. Rajvi Naik, Ms. Munira D'Souza, Mr. Anthony Gomes, Dr. Hanuman Sopdekar, and our student volunteers for all their help. A special thanks to Aaron Noronha, student of MA Part 1 Portuguese, for designing the poster. Masoom Sheikh, student of first year integrated MSc Data Science, for designing the brochure and the flex. And our compeers for the conference, Ms. Runa Menezes and Mr. Francho Botcotta. Last but not the least, I am thankful to the Directorate of Digital Learning and Initiatives, DDLI, for live streaming this event, Mr. Narayan Divkar for the photography, Mr. Vipul Moge for the catering, and Goa KGN Travels for their transport services. William Arthur Ward once said, "Feeling gratitude and not expressing it is like wrapping a present and not giving it." Once again, thank you very much to all who are assembled here. Your interest in this program means everything to us. Thank you for making this event a successful one.
Thank you, Mr. Uzgaonkar. May I request Professor Koshi Tarakan, co-convener of this conference, to present a memento to the Honorable Vice Chancellor of Goa University, Senior Professor Harilal B. Menon, as a token of our appreciation. Thank you, everyone. I now request Mr. Uzgaonkar to escort our luminaries to the refreshment area to join us for a cup of tea. And for the rest of us, we will now have a quick refreshment break and reassemble here in 15 minutes. 15 minutes. Thank you and see you soon. research. Professor Jackson is an academic member of the Academia de Marinha and the Academia-Portuguesa de Historia, Lisbon. He has a host of books and publications to his credit and is the recipient of the Vasco da Gama Medal, Portugal, and the Ordem de Rio Branco Medal, Brazil. Let's give him a round of applause. When he isn't writing or immersed in research or delivering keynote addresses, you'll probably find him playing the cello. As a matter of fact, Dr. Jackson has performed as a cellist in several professional orchestras and a string quartet. Let's give it up once again for Dr. Jackson.
Thank you very much. Professor Dean Andrada Lagui, Professor Koshi Dean Tarakan, the steering committee, and Professor Dhruv Uskunkarn, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. As chair of the Council on Latin American and Iberian Studies at Yale University, I'm honored to be at Goa University to participate in the conference, India-Portugal, Confluence of Cultures. The Council at Yale University is collaborating with our South Asian Studies Council to promote studies of Goa in a broad Indian, Iberian, and South Asian context, with a focus here today on philosophy, literature, and the arts. Our aim is to further interaction and collaboration between Goan and international scholars. We wish to recognize the work of all Goan scholars, those here at Goa University and others who have dedicated themselves to Goan studies. Our theme today, India-Portugal, Confluence of Cultures, continues to place studies of Goan philosophy, literature, and arts in a broad perspective while focusing on Goa-based writers and artists, and it recognizes the important history, which includes some distinguished figures from past centuries. Please allow me a brief historical panorama. In the 16th century, Garcia da Horta, horticulturalist, pharmacologist, and physician, came to Goa with his mentor, Martim Afonso de Souza, in the fleet of 1554, and lived out the second half of his life in Portuguese India. Quote, a pioneer of tropical medicine, in Cigar Boxer's words. Horta represents scientists whose inventory and medical study of tropical flora represented a revolution in medical knowledge, shown in his book, Colóquio dos Simples e Drogas e Coisas Medicinais, da Índia, one of the first books published here in 1563. From the 18th century, featured in a statue in Panjim, is José Custódio de Faria, born the same year as Mozart, who published in Paris his De la cause du sommeil lucide, the cause of lucid sleep, based on experiments of Franz Anton Mesmer. He took part in the French Revolution and was professor at the Université de France in Nîmes and a character in Pierre-Alexandre Dumas' 1844 novel, Le Comte de Monte Cristo. Looking back at our predecessors in the study of Goa in the 19th century, we recognize Joaquim Heliodoro da Cunha Rivara, much esteemed at this university, whose 22 years spent in Goa produced important studies, including a translation of Thomas Stevens' Arte da Língua Canarim, and the Arquivo Português Oriental, a collection of valuable documents on Portuguese presence in Asia. Worth our attention also is the notable case of Antonio Lopes Mendes, who, after preparing the magistral volumes of A India-Portuguesa in the 1860s, went to Brazil, where he left 95 drawings and wrote Oriente America, still a very little known work, comparing customs of people of Brazil with those of Goa. There is Gabriel de Saldanha, História de Goa from 1898, and also from the 19th century is José Gerson da Cunha's important work on the antiquities of Shaul and Bassain, and surprisingly, his book, Origin of Bombay, with a long illuminating section on the Portuguese period with information on Garcia da Horta and communities such as Ormuz and Shaul. For research on Creole Portuguese, Sebastião Delgado's work on Portuguese dialects and his notable Glossario Luso-Asiatico remain essential references, as are Tavares de Melo's articles on the Indo-Portuguese dialect of Ceylon, found in the journal published here, O Oriente Português. With Delgado and Tavares de Melo, the confluence began to flow back from India to Portugal. At the time of my own introduction to Goa, beginning in the 1970s, I had the good fortune to meet many active Goan scholars, publishers, essayists, and journalists. And while these names may be unfamiliar to most of you, I would like to recognize them for their historical, certainly, importance. From the Jesuit John Correa Afonso to the publisher Dr. José Rangel of the notable typography, the scholar of Goan music, Michael Martins, Father Felinto Dias, author of a forgotten history of Indo-Portuguese literature, the Esboço da História da Literatura Indo-Portuguesa of 1963. Jeremias Xavier de Carvalho, who republished historical texts and founded the Academia Oriente e Ocidente de Goa. Aleixo Costa, author of a 2-volume biography of great Goans. The great José Pereira, author of essential books on Goan architecture and music, and not neglecting the repository of all things Goan, who was Percival Noronha. What I have come to think is most remarkable about their generation was their ability to combine a remarkable repertoire of local knowledge with an international outlook, perhaps a formative and lasting characteristic of Goan society where East meets West. The notable anthropologist Robert Newman wrote that Goans have been multicultural for 1,000 years. Many notable contributions to Goan literary scholarship at that time were the work of foreign scholars, such as Henry Schulberg's Bibliography of Goa from 1982, compiled with the expert aid of Carmo Azevedo, which continues to be an essential guide to published materials. Robert Newman's recent books, titled Goan Anthropology, based on research in the 1960s to the 80s, were recently published in 2019 by Goa 1556 and Frederick Noronha. The British scholar Paul Melui Castro, whose father was Goan, has published important anthologies such as Lengthening Shadows, an anthology of Goan short stories, along with other essays and neglected works. He writes for the João Roque Literary Journal and collaborated with Brazilian scholar Elder Gomes on the Pensando Goa project, the Thinking Goa, at the University of São Paulo, Brazil. Gomes is also a member of the International Seminar on Indo-Portuguese History, formed in 1978, which met here in Goa in November. Philosopher Jonathan Ganeri, fortunately with us today, and I would like to recognize his important inspiration for the creation of this conference, has contributed 3 important books that make a connection between Indian philosophy and Portugal's most complex and essential contemporary writer, Fernando Pessoa, the latest one to be presented here shortly. We are here to study the confluence of cultures that continues to bring together India and Portugal, which is the country where Goan literature first began to receive international attention through Vimala Devi's groundbreaking anthology of Indo-Portuguese literature published in 1971. That anthology was perhaps the first important step to launch a post-revolutionary flowering of studies of Goa in Portugal, which is now drawing more international attention to Goan studies. Prominent current examples, not to mention other people here, such as Professor Rosa Maria Pérez, include Angela Barreto Xavier's book, Religion and Empire in Portuguese India, Felipe Vicente's book, Other Orientalisms, on José Gerson da Cunha, her Império da Visão, on photography in the colonial Portuguese context, on the photographers Sousa Paul, and Entre Dois Impérios, Between Two Empires, on British travelers to Goa, plus an important essay on Goan women writers from 1860 to 1940. There's also Joana Pass's book, Goan Literature in Portuguese, 19th and 20th Centuries, and as I mentioned, the works of the pioneer in Goan studies, the anthropologist with us today, Rosa Maria Pérez, editor of the Essential Stories of Goa from 1997, the Os Portugueses no Oriente, História, Itinerários, Representações, 2006, and author more recently of The Tulsi and the Cross, Anthropology and the Colonial Encounter in Goa, and other essays on Goan literature, culture, and society, including Goa Passado e Presente, Past and Present Goa, and Goa Portuguesa e Pós-Colonial, Literatura, Cultura e Sociedade, Portuguese and Post-Colonial Goa Literature, Culture, and Society. We cannot forget Susana Sardo, who unfortunately couldn't be here today, a frequent visitor to Goa and holder of the CUNHA RIVARA chair, and her studies of Goan music, and her book Guerras de Jasmine e Mogadim, and her project with a very interesting title of Lusosonia, Luso sound, at the University of Aveiro. Yale University has played, up to today, a small role in Goan studies. The 2013 Yale Conference on Goa, a Post-Colonial Society Between Cultures, brought together Goan authors, including Anthony Gomes, Victor Rangel Ribeiro, and Margaret Mascarenhas, as well as scholars including Rochelle Pinto, Felipe Vicente, Robert Newman, Paul Melui Castro, and the journalist Ashley de Mello. I would especially like to mention again my thanks to Rochelle, who edited the proceedings, and to Frederick Noronha, who published them in the book of the same title that came out in 2018 by Goa 1556. This November, the Council at Yale again sponsored a conference on Goa, the Goa Perspectives on Culture and History, which paired historians Pedro Cardim from the New University of Lisbon and Liam Rocky, an historian from Michigan State University, with Ananya Chakravarti's local focus on language, religion, and locality, Dr. John de Figueiredo's presentation on the teaching of Ayurvedic treatments in Goa Medical College, putting together history with cultural perspectives promised to add a vital dimension to Goan studies. Professor Ananya Kabir, who subsequently came to lecture here in Goa University, presented her very interesting theory on musical creolization and linguistic creolization, while art historian Edward Cook Jr., also with us today, and Mimi Yingpruksawan presented on Goan arts and crafts and on picturing the Japan voyage and Goans in Namban screens, respectively. The event ended with Robert Newman describing his early years in Goa as an anthropologist from the 1960s. Bringing together history and culture with some unusual topics resulted in an energy that bonded that group together. With some 50 virtual visitors registered online, this small conference helped to promote Goan studies both to a university and to an international audience. I hope perhaps some of you saw it or would be interested to see it. Author Margaret Mascarenhas, who contributed her story Partition to the Yale 2013 conference, wrote that her reason for republishing her novel Skin in Goa was, quote, to highlight the nexus between literature and art and to promote Goa-based writers and artists and art photographers. In the novel's prologue, we find a portrait of such a writer, quote, in Portuguese India, where east meets west, a woman sits with her pen poised above a blank sheet of paper. She gazes at a point where the sun sets in the Arabian Sea, and it seems to her that the end is the only viable beginning. To reach the reality of Goa's multicultural and multilingual society, study of Goa is necessarily part of a wide global frame reaching far from Goa's shores, symbolized by that vanishing point in the Arabian Sea. For centuries, Goa was the administrative and ecclesiastical center of all the enclaves and territories occupied or contacted by the Portuguese voyagers from East Africa to Japan, most of them societies to which Goa can still claim some kind of affinity. In the 16th century, Goa became the focal point of an oceanic empire extending east in the voyages to Malacca, Macau, the Sunday Islands, and Japan, and west across the Indian Ocean to Mozambique and Brazil. Situated alongside an ancient oceanic world of trade, extending from Rome to China, and with a history of miscegenation and trade, Goa's demography anticipated and prefigured the global multi-ethnic world of today. The oceanic connections were aided by diaspora, one of the enduring themes in Goan society, studied in Stella Mascarenhas Key's book, Colonialism, Migration, and the International Catholic Goan Community. In Victor Rangel Ribeiro's novel, Tivolain, which I will discuss on Wednesday, the two main characters, having traveled from Goa with their families as youths, return years later from Kuala Lumpur and Kenya separately from east and west before meeting in a village in Bardez. In the West, the topic of Goan diaspora in Africa is the subject already of extensive research, such as that by Selma Carvalho, author of A Railway Runs Through It, Goans of British East Africa, The Sisterhood of Swans, and editor of The Brave New World of Goa Writing from 2018. Connections with East Asia remain less explored. In her recent lecture here, Professor Ananya Kabir illustrated global connections through music, which in the late 19th century mixed polkas, waltzes, lunduns, and batucas, thereby demonstrated through compositions such as Carlos Eugenio Ferreira's Rapsodia Ibero-Indiana, Iberian Indian Rhapsody, evidence of, quote, Goans enjoying the same social dances that were in circulation and vogue throughout the Lusophone world. As Professor Kabir showed, compositions for piano influenced by the polka and waltz were being printed at the same time in Brazil and in Goa. This year, in the East, through music, Goa and Macau explored their historical connections in the presentations in Macau, sponsored by the Orient Foundation, of singer Nadia Rebelo, guitarist Loyola Pereira, and multi-instrumentalist Franz Schubert Cotta, with a repertoire featuring fado, mando, deknis, and dulpods. The Orient Foundation's aim is to enlarge the cultural connections between Portugal and Goa to include Macau and East Timor. Further cultural connections between Goa and Macau touch on cuisine and the Patois language. Macau cuisine presented in Graça Pacheco Jorge's magnificently illustrated book, A Cozinha de Macau na Casa do Meu Avô, Macau Cuisine in My Grandfather's House, first published in 1992, republished now in 2015, adapted recipes from India and Malacca, such as vindaloo, sarapatel, and bhanji. Macau Patois, according to Daniel Barreiros, made use of, quote, ancient vernacular vocabulary, and many other items originated in India and Malacca. An old cantiga from Macau, for example, which I found in the Ta Siang Kuo journal of turn of the 20th century, reveals the presence in Macau of Goans and their offspring. And the cantiga, 4 lines, reads this way. Noia na janela, com fula mugarim, sua mãe tancareira, sua pai canarim. Young girl in the window with a jasmine flower, your mother sailed a sampan, your father is Canaries. The Lusophone world continues to be one of syncretism of languages and peoples, living, quote, between cultures in Asia from earliest times to today's globalization, is more than an alternation between one culture and another. Rather, it is a mixture of practices in a coexistence, an interdependent dialogue and synthetic discourse. One of the longest lasting connections between Goa and the world of Portuguese voyages is musical and linguistic. In my research, I collected and recorded many of the cantigas, or folk quatrains, that are sung by descendants of Portuguese from Daman to Batticaloa to Malacca, Singapore, and Macau. The community in Batticaloa, for example, consists of the mixed-race, quote, people in between, to use a term applied by the sociologist Michael Roberts to the Portuguese burghers of Sri Lanka, being defined also as dark-skinned artisans living alongside Portuguese forts or settlements along the Asian littoral, communities by the sea whose descendants can still be found in limited numbers and whose situation predates the modern category of multinational and multi-ethnic minority citizens. The cantigas can be traced to the Portuguese cancioneiros, traditional songbooks, collected, for example, by scholar Leite de Vasconcelos in the early 20th century. Local themes and variants are also common, as is the presence of another contact language, the basis for a Creole, seen, for example, in the widely spread cantiga called Papagaio Verde, or the green parrot, one of the oldest and most widely known cantigas. This parrot flies in from afar to teach maxims, to play the rogue, to criticize or insult, to sing to a lover, to beat its wings and sing dance tunes. It may blurt out inconvenient truths that denounce its deceitful owners. Verses of Papagaio Verde performed in Creole Portuguese in communities across South and Southeast Asia attest to the universality of the folk song and the figure of the parrot as a commentator on Indo-Portuguese and Luso-Asian community life. The song is part of a shared legacy of traditional melodies and of lyrics that function as essential components of social life, festivals, ceremonies, and rituals. Lyrics of the cantigas described community culture, especially courtship and marriage, and voiced both its social concerns and its private desires. Sebastian Delgado commented on the spread of such folk verses throughout the Luso-Asian Creole communities by noting similarities in quatrains of the green parrot, the Papagaio Verde from Daman, and those of Malacca. And the quote from Delgado is the following: O passarinho verde dos atuais cristãos de Malacca parece ser uma deturpação de papagaio verde, forma que aparece na seguinte quadra de Damão. Or to translate, the green parrot, or passarinho verde of the current cristãos of Malacca, seems to be a deturpation of the green parrot, the Papagaio Verde, in a form found in the following quatrain from Damão, which is the following: Papagaio Verde sentar sobre leter, bate bate asas surumba, chamar a paz solteiro. Green parrot sitting on the milk pail, beating its wings, surumba, call the eligible bachelor over. And the Goan poet Nascimento Mendonça, from the late 19th century, praises the romantic nature of the cantigas in Goa with his verses: Raparigas, raparigas, mogarins cor de luar, vossas almas são cantigas que noite alta canto mar. Young girls, jasmine flowers, color of moonlight, your souls are cantigas that the sea sings late at night. Paul de Meli Castro writes in the Joan Roque Literary Journal that, quote, Goa was and is a product of manifold influences on the ground from both east and west, and a global history connected to the seaways of the Indian Ocean and beyond. Ananya Kabir brings this idea more up to date by stating, quote, Goa's past is embedded within a transoceanic history of Portuguese connections, and Goa's present is embedded within a post-colonial India where emergent technologies and increased mobility are catalyzing renewed interest in those connections. For the next 3 days, we look forward to presentations on myth and literature, philosophical dialogue, artistic expressions, history and society, linguistic connections, arts and crafts, visual discourse, diaspora, theater, and other topics of the Indo-Portuguese confluence. On behalf of Yale University, the Council of Latin American and Iberian Studies, and the South Asian Studies Council, I'm immensely grateful for the collaboration of Goa University, which has enjoyed the cooperation and goodwill of the Vice Chancellor, Senior Professor Harilal B. Menon, Dean Anuradha Vagli, the faculty of the SHENOI GOEMBAB School of Languages and Literatures, the School of Sanskrit, Philosophy, and Indic Studies. This conference would not have been possible without the work of the steering committee and the dedication, special dedication of Professor Dhruv Uzgunkar. A special thanks to all of those who worked on the program and helped secure arrangements for this conference, which I would like to dedicate to the memory of author Margaret Mascarenhas. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Jackson, for giving us such a fascinating, in-depth, and exhaustive overview of the cultural connections between Portuguese and Goa. I have these very vivid images of green parrots, eligible bachelors, young girls, and jasmine flowers that will stay with me for a long time. Thank you once again. Let's hear it once more for Dr. Jackson. And may I request Dhruv, if you're around, to please escort Dr. Jackson back to, oh, sorry. Before we do that, Dhruv, please come forward. We'd like to present a memento to Dr. Jackson as a token of our appreciation. Thank you once again. We will now have a book presentation titled Artifact Minds and Synthetic Selves, Reality Enriched in Fernando Pessoa and the Yoga Vashishta. The presentation is based on Professor Jonardhan Ganeri's latest book, Fernando Pessoa, Imagination and the Self, published by Oxford University Press in 2024. And to present it before us, we have none other than the author himself. May I request Professor Jonardhan Ganeri to make his way to the dais, please? Professor Ganeri is the Bimal K. Matilal Distinguished Professor of Philosophy at the University of Toronto. As a philosopher, his work draws on various philosophical traditions to construct new positions in the philosophy of mind, metaphysics, and epistemology. To give us a glimpse of what his new book entails, may I invite Professor Ganeri to deliver your presentation. Let's give Professor Ganeri a round of applause, please.
Okay, it's working, yeah. So, well, yes, thank you very much for inviting me. Now, in the first iteration of this conference, which happened last year, we were joined then by the Lisbon-based scholar and philosopher Bartholomew Ryan, who can't be with us today, but we were both at that time working on books about Fernando Pessoa, and both of these books came out during the course of the last year. So we thought the original idea was to have a joint book launch of our two books. Bartholomew's book, which came out in a Critical Life series, is really a genuine critical life of Pessoa and looks at all his various writings and his life in a very nicely written and compact way, much more compact than Zenith's massive biography of Pessoa that came out the previous year. In my own book, my main idea was to take some of Pessoa's philosophical ideas and consider how they can be applied to Indian philosophy, which is my main area of research, to see whether, in particular, the concept of heteronomy has antecedents in the Indian literature. What I think I'll do is to just give you a snapshot of what I'm trying to, the type of argumentation that I'm trying to put forward in this book. It's not so much a history of past encounters, Indo-Portuguese encounters. It's more like an attempt to create a new one, as it were. So now, the philosopher David Chalmers argues in his book about virtual reality, called Reality Plus, that virtual reality is a genuine reality and that simulated minds are genuine minds. He writes, "Can a digital system be conscious, or are only humans and animals conscious? The question matters a great deal in thinking about digital worlds. Consider the virtual world of Daniel Galou's Simulacrum 3, which pioneered the simulation genre. This virtual world is a pure simulation, containing many simulated humans with simulated brains. Are these simulated humans conscious? If they are, then to shut down the system irreversibly would be an atrocity, an act of genocide. If they're not conscious, then they're digital zombies, and shutting down the system seems no worse than turning off an ordinary video game. Chalmers assumes that the answer is in the affirmative. Simulated minds are genuine minds, he writes. And he defends a version of virtual realism, that the objects seen in a simulation are real, albeit virtual. So he writes, do the objects we perceive in a simulated world exist? If I'm in a perfect simulation, does the tree outside my window really exist? My opponent says, no, the window and the tree are mere hallucinations. I say, yes, the tree and the window really exist. At some level, they're digital objects grounded in digital processes in a computer, but they're no less real for that. Now, most philosophical discussions of virtual reality, including David Chalmers' own, fail to see that there can be virtual subjects as well as virtual objects. For Chalmers, it's as if, as the gamer, I simply enter a virtual world exactly as myself, that while the world is made virtual, I remain actual. So let me use the term reality double plus for the idea that there can be virtual subjects as well as virtual worlds. Pessoan heteronyms, a heteronym, for those of you who are unfamiliar with this concept, is like an imagined mind or a simulated self or a subjective artifact. A virtual subject is my preferred translation, or a made-up, individuated point of view, as Zenith puts it. A virtualized first-person perspective and a virtualized style of feeling and experiencing. So if we use the label reality double plus for the idea that there can be virtual subjects or Pessoan heteronyms, and that these synthetic selves are as genuinely real as their natural counterparts, then while what Chalmers rightly argues is that simulated minds are genuine minds and that real minds can be uploaded into simulations, the possibility that I'm interested in already takes both for granted. It's the further possibility, the one that Pessoa explored, that a real mind can assume the cognitive and affective stance of a first-person perspective of a simulated mind, and so become another I, a heteronym. Now I can clarify what I have in mind with reference to the Indian concept of an avatar. The word avatar is one of those which has made its way across from Sanskrit into English. It did so in the 1980s with video games such as Ultima 4, Quest of the Avatar. An avatar in gaming jargon is a virtual body in a virtual reality, the particular body over which the gamer has executive control. And if the game is immersive, dictates the perspective from which the gamer sees the action unfold. David Chalmers thinks that this is also the original Sanskrit use. He writes, the word avatar comes from the Hindu tradition, in which it's used for the physical bodies that gods such as Vishnu take on when they come down to earth. Vishnu is said to inhabit a physical body with human form, an avatar. The embodiment may be temporary, but while it lasts, the avatar is Vishnu's body. The cover of my book, by the way, is the 10 avatars of Vishnu. And this is, he suggests, how it is for virtual avatars too. In my view, he writes, virtual avatars have much the same status as Vishnu's physical avatars. I can be embodied in a virtual avatar. The embodiment may be temporary, but when I inhabit an avatar, it's my virtual body. Now, I agree with Chalmers that this is how the term has come to be used in the virtual reality literature, but I'm skeptical about his exegesis of its meaning in the Hindu tradition. And actually, it's very germane to our discussion to see how the Sanskrit word avatar, avatara, is actually deployed. Notice that the idea of an avatar as my virtual body, a body I have executive control over within the simulation, carries with it no implication of heteronomy. It's the same me, the me as on the outside, who simply happens to be embodied virtually in my avatar inside the simulation. When we speak of Matsya as an avatara of Krishna, of Vishnu, is that all we mean? That this body, which is half fish and half man, is simply a body Vishnu has decided to inhabit during a brief stint on earth? Were Matsya instead a heteronym, a Pessoan heteronym of Vishnu, then something more would need to be brought into the picture. It would now be that Vishnu is on earth as Matsya, that there's a way of being on earth for Vishnu distinctly associated with his being Matsya, a first-person perspective, a self, a style of experience that's distinctly associated with being Matsya. So let's look more closely to see if an avatara is merely an incarnation, as Chalmers claims, or has associations more resembling Pessoan heteronomy. The term means literally descent, alighting, descending, or going down into, from the Sanskrit root tri, to pass across or over, with the verbal prefix ava signifying a movement downwards. The term avatara thus comes to be used as a general expression to designate entities that come down to earth from some higher realm. And yet the Hindu picture is immediately made more complicated because the descent is only one half of the story. Following the descent, there's a second step described as a manifestation or as a birth. The idea is there in Bhagavad Gita 4:6-7, which has Krishna say, "Although I'm unborn and imperishable and the lord of the creatures, I transform the nature that is mine and take birth through an appearance of myself. Whenever the moral law languishes, Bharata, and lawlessness flourishes, I generate myself." The Harivamsha describes Vishnu's descent in similar terms. "Therefore, come personally, O Vishnu, let us go together on earth. Through yourself, create yourself." So it's never a matter merely of dropping down. There's always some sort of self-creation also involved. Now, the scholar André Couture has gone further. He has noted that the term avatarana has a precise technical use in the language of theatre, where it's used to describe the movement performed by actors as they move from the wings to the stage itself. As Couture notes in addition, the fact that in the Bhagavad Purana, Krishna is presented as an actor, and that the Vrindavana forest is depicted as a stage upon which he plays his sports, are entirely consistent with the idea that an avatara is basically a deity who dons various disguises as he takes his place on stage. So Vishnu is an actor making an entrance, his actions having the form of a play, a lila on a stage. As Couture puts it, not only does Vishnu descend upon the earth to remove its burden, but he's also an actor who dons the most unexpected disguises. Now, I would just correct one detail in Couture's description. When an actor walks onto the stage, it's not quite right to say that they don a disguise. Rather, what happens is that they move into character. They're no longer themselves, but the characters whose role it is that they play. This movement into character is a heteronymic movement, not fully or properly represented as merely pseudonymous disguise. It's the actor as character who now appears, and the audience see the character in the actor, or see the character's emotion in the actor's dramatic performance. That's the meaning of the term rasa in Sanskrit aesthetics. Pessoa himself appeals to a dramaturgic analogy, writing, "As a dramatist, I automatically transform what I feel into an expression far removed from what I felt, and I create in my emotions a non-existent person who truly felt that feeling, and in feeling it, felt yet other related emotions that I, purely I, forgot to feel." That comes much closer to the original Sanskrit concept of avatara than the term avatar in the gaming literature. While Fernando Pessoa's relationship with his heteronyms is complicated, they exist as protagonists in imaginary stories of his own creation, and Pessoa imagines himself as them, or imagines being them. In one of his most philosophical writings, a fictional essay entitled Notes for the Memory of My Master Cairo, Pessoa has Cairo suggest that things thus seen in dreams, dream is Pessoa's term for acts of imagination, have much the same status as things seen in pictures. He says, Fernando Pessoa turned to Cairo. "Tell me this," he said, pointing his cigarette. "How do you regard dreams? Are they real or not?" "I regard dreams as I regard shadows," answered Cairo unexpectedly with his usual divine quickness. "A shadow is real, but it's less real than a stone. A dream is real, otherwise it wouldn't be a dream, but it's less real than a thing." "And what do you call a stone that you see in a dream?" asked Fernando, smiling. "I call it a dream," answered my master, Cairo. "I call it a dream of a stone." "Why do you say of a stone? Why do you employ the word stone?" "For the same reason that you, when you see my picture, say, 'That's Cairo,' and don't mean that it's me in the flesh." We all broke out laughing. "I see and I give up," said Fernando, laughing with the rest of us. So Fernando asks an excellent question here, and Cairo gives an equally excellent reply. For we do use the name of a picture's real subject matter in order to refer to its depiction. We say, pointing at a portrait hanging on the wall, "That's Cairo." But how can we do so, and what is the real nature of objects in dreams or depictions? Well, these questions are nowhere in literature explored in more detail and with greater sophistication than in the Yoga Vashishta, otherwise known as the Mokshapaya, a remarkable sprawling philosophical poem written in Kashmir, telling of sage Vashishta's discussions with Rama, and embedding within its text no less than 64 fabulous philosophical stories. One of the most significant for our purposes is the story of second Leela. Here's how the story goes in Windy Doniger's abridgment. Queen Leela was the wife of King Padma. When he died, Leela prayed to the goddess Saraswati, who explained to her that in a former birth, Padma and Leela had been a sage named Vashishta and his wife Arundhati. She also told Leela that the king had now been reborn as King Vidurata. Since Leela had not been reborn, the king had taken a new wife whose name just happened to be Leela. Saraswati used her magic powers to transport herself and Queen Leela through the air to the palace where King Vidurata lived. Invisible, they saw him in his court. When a great battle took place, they went to the battlefield, and there Leela caught sight of the second Leela, who had the very same form as hers, like a reflection in a mirror. Puzzled at this, the first Leela asked Saraswati how there could be another woman just like her. The goddess replied with a long lecture on the projection of mental images from inside to outside, as in dreams. These words were overheard by the second Leela, who spoke to Saraswati and said, "In my dreams, I've often spoken with a goddess of wisdom, and she looked exactly as you look to me right now." The first Leela said to Vidurata, "I am Leela, your queen from a former life. This second Leela is your queen by my art. Produced for you by me, she's just a reflection." So Leela declares herself to have created this second Leela, who is, she says, her own reflection. In one of those metaphysical backflips for which the Yoga Vashishta is so well loved, this second Leela says that she has seen a second Saraswati in her dreams, thereby insinuating that her second Leela's claim on reality is just as solid as that of Leela the first. It would be as if the author of Notes for the Memory of My Master Cairo drops himself in on the get-together of heteronyms in order to witness Fernando Pessoa, the second Pessoa, as we might put it, holding forth. Leela's reflection is called Leela, specifically second Leela, just as a portrait of Cairo is also called Cairo, and Cairo imagined or dreamt or simulated is still called Cairo. Now, our problem is to understand how the same name is used twice. We do the same in theatre too, saying, "Here is Shakuntala," even as an actor playing Shakuntala enters from the wings. In neither case is it plausible to say that we're suffering under an illusion, that we misperceive the painting as its subject matter or the actor as the character. We know full well that it's a painting, and we are as happy to comment on the painting style, brushwork, provenance, and so on, as on the quality of an actor's performance. It's become customary to say instead that we see Cairo in the painting, and seeing in requires that we attend both to what's depicted and to the depicting material itself. a virtual realist such as Chalmers will make sense of the double use, as in Leela and second Leela, in the following way. They will say that what is seen within a simulation are simulacra. There's a simulacrum, second Leela, and there's an object outside the simulation, Leela, and these are different objects because one is made of digital information, or whatever stuff dreams are made of, and the other is made of carbon molecules. The different objects are, however, closely related insofar as one is a virtual simulacrum of the other, and that's how we use the same name twice. The semantic rule is something like the name N of an object X can be used to refer to a simulacrum of X. Likewise, the virtual realist Lambert Wiesing describes virtual objects as artificial presences and says, a virtual reality is only given if the image no longer serves as a medium for referring to something absent, but rather if the image becomes a medium by which a particular kind of object is produced and presented, an object that's exclusively visible and yet, like a ghost, acts as if it had substance and the properties of a substance. So for both these thinkers, there's an entity, be it a virtual object or an artificial presence, which serves as a simulacrum of X and to which the name N of X can therefore be applied. The virtual realist says that we use the same name twice over because the virtual object, whether in an immersive simulation or in a two-dimensional picture, is a stand-in for an actual object. Now that view is, I suggest, exactly the kind of view that the Yoga Vasishta wants us to reject. There's just one Leela inside and outside the simulation, where here the simulation is a Saraswati-generated glimpse of the afterlife. Leela and second Leela are two uses of a name to refer to one and the same entity, Leela. It's true that the Yoga Vasishta has traditionally been depicted as a work which, quote, teaches a variety of esoteric knowledge meant to liberate an aspirant from the vagaries of the phenomenal world. But we must reject a popular but overly simplistic reading of the philosophical message of the work. This simple reading would have it that what the text demonstrates, or is intended to demonstrate, is that everything is an illusion and that idealism is true. Consider another story, the story of Lavana, who enters a magician-induced simulation in which he lives in a village among villagers for many years. On emerging from the dream, Lavana sets off in search of the village and the villagers among whom he had in the simulation lived for so long. To his and our astonishment, he does indeed discover it. The village exists outside the simulation as much as inside. It wasn't a merely phenomenal world. The metaphysical claim made by Vasishta in this story has to do with the identity of objects. What it claims is that virtual objects, the objects within a simulation, are identical to normal objects, objects without the simulation. It's an affirmation of what we might call the thesis of trans-simulation object identity. Here, Pessoa, by the way, is clearly on Vasishta's side, saying, for example, this new reality, that of a strange forest, makes its appearance without effacing the reality of my warm alcove. and that tremulous, transparent landscape clearly belongs to them both. The presence of the same objects in both of two fields of experience is what Pessoa calls intersectionism. Now, attempting objects is to associate each of the two uses of a name with a distinct route to its single referent. When Gottlob Frege introduced the concept of a mode of presentation into the philosophy of language, his aim was to explain how it could be that the identity between Hesperus and Phosphorus, the morning star and the evening star, both of which are none other than the planet Venus, can be an informative one. If both names refer to the same object, why isn't it true a priori that one is identical to the other? It isn't a priori, Frege pointed out, because the same object is given twice over under two different modes of presentation. Yet Frege will only take us so far in solving the mystery of second Lila. For consider again Lovener. He was certainly surprised to discover the village, the very same village he had got to know so well while under the magician's spell. But his surprise wasn't the result of discovering that the village he was now seeing and the village he had got to know so well were, after all, one and the same village. He knew that already from the first moment he came across it. Indeed, he went in search of it. He didn't think that here is a village and there was a village, and then only discover that they were one and the same village. That wasn't the source of his surprise. What surprised him was that the village should be there at all. How is it possible that my village, the village in which I lived for so many years, should be here? It's the same for Lila. When Saraswati gives her a peek into the afterlife, she's certainly just surprised to find Lila there. But her sense of surprise isn't due to the discovery that this Lila is her after all. Her surprise is of the form, what am I doing here? She is presented as extremely vexed that the same things which appeared in her glimpse of the afterlife are also in the here and now, and marvels at Saraswati's artistic power, Maya, such that, she says, the same high trees, the same spacious forests of palm and hintala trees are both on the inside as well as outside myself. She tries to rationalize it to herself by likening her new and alarming situation to the workings of a mirror, the very same objects, which are outside being reflected in it. And that does seem right. If I see the sun reflected in a window pane, I might be mistaken about its location in space, but it's certainly the sun that I'm seeing. What is it then that causes Lila to be surprised? It's precisely the discovery that there's only one world and not two. Lovener had thought, on emerging from the magician's spell, that he had been taken to a world of phenomenal illusion, a world whose contents don't really exist. The lesson he's taught is that this was never the case. He wasn't taken to another world, but to the same world differently made present. He hadn't known that how the world is made present matters just as much as what is made present. He had taken it for granted that there's just one correct way of having the world in view, just one correct way of interrogating or experience.
History and Society. To chair this session, may I invite Professor Lakshmi Subramanian. I'd like her to make her way to the dais, please, and let's give her a warm round of applause. Professor Subramanian is a retired professor of history from the Center for Studies in Social Sciences, Kolkata, and the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, BITS Pilani, Goa. She is well known for her work on maritime history and the Indian Ocean, as well as on the cultural history of southern India in the 20th century. She has taught at a number of universities in South Africa, Poland, Germany, and India. She has served at the Center for Studies in Social Sciences, Kolkata, in the capacity of research professor and dean, and has been visiting professor to several universities, including the University of Glasgow, JNU, the Indian Institute of Science, and the Flinders University of Adelaide. Professor Subramanian has authored over 10 books on the economic and cultural history of India, histories of predation, and the social history of music in modern South India. Her publications include Singing Gandhi's India Music and Sonic Nationalism, and The Sovereign and the Pirate, Ordering India's Maritime Subjects in India's Western Littoral. To her students, Professor Subramanian is a great mentor and even dedicates a lot of her time to tutoring kids in her neighborhood. Let's have another warm round of applause for Professor Lakshmi Subramanian, and I hand the chair over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just be sure we end the session at 1:30, because I think we're 15 minutes, so yeah. Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here and to be able to chair this really distinguished panel, which is 4 exciting presentations that are going to look at very diverse aspects of Goa's historical experience and its representation. So I'm really looking forward to it. I will not take too much time. I will simply introduce my guests and then ask them to speak. I think for purposes of time and to have a good Q&A, we could have presentations of about 15 minutes back to back and then have at least 20 minutes for a discussion. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce and welcome Rosa Maria Perez, whose work actually I am acquainted with, particularly her wonderful work on the Devadasis, which I took a lot of insight from when I was doing my own work on Anglo-Indian law about the representation of the dancing girl and criminalization of their practices. So welcome, Rosa, to the panel, who, as many of you will know, is an anthropologist and a senior researcher at the Center for Research in Anthropology. She's been professor at the Department of Anthropology in the University of Lisbon, has been a visiting professor at many, many universities, including Brown. Her core research interest is on Indian society and social segregation. Today, she speaks to us on Goa beyond the Portuguese gaze, an anthropological approach. So I welcome Rosa and look forward to your presentation.
Thank you. I have a PowerPoint I put here. Well, good morning, good afternoon. I would like to start by thank you, Professor David Jackson, for inviting me for this conference, and the Dean, Professor Wagler. I would also like to thank Dr. Delphine Correia da Silva, the coordinator of CUNHA RIVARA Chair, and it's an honor to have this, my presentation chair for Professor Lakshmi Subramanian, whose work I admire. Thank you so much. Well, I tried to cut my paper when I knew I have 20 minutes, now 15 would be too less. So my presentation today is the result of my last research that indeed has taken several years about an Indian, a Goan photographer, Ganesh. He used to sign his work as Ganesh. He was the brother of a famous painter, Vamona Navalkar. Both signed Ganesh in honor of a brother called Ganesh, who died very young. So Ganesh is at the studio in Goa, and his collection, who is now at Museu of Orient in Lisbon, has more than 15,000 negatives that I've been covering in the last 7 years, both in Portugal and in Goa, trying to interview different people and trying to identify not only the people that he have portrayed, but mostly many circumstances. And Ganesh has covered a diversity of social and ritual practices, both Catholic and Hindu. And most of all, he has covered the last years of the Portuguese administration in Goa, 1950s, up to the late 1980s. So before reading my paper shortly, I would like to show you some photographs that will allow me to introduce you to another way of looking at Goa through a photographer who was a Hindu. And even though we cover different Catholic practices, his work allows us not only to not only to understand the interconnection between Catholicism and Hinduism in Goa, but also, or the Portuguese and Hindu culture, Indian Goan culture, but also how Hinduism was indeed dominant in Goa in many aspects, and its impact on Portuguese rule. So I will show you some photographs before, where shall I? So this is was his studio. It doesn't exist any longer, and it was quite difficult for me to identify it. The collection was in Lisbon. The name of the studio was written in some envelopes, but the studio didn't exist any longer. His daughter put this identification outside the studio in Rua José Falcão Street, which leads to Church Square. This is Ganesh, Krishna, Sinai, Navalkar. These are some of the envelopes, of the 15,000 envelopes. Most of them didn't have any identification, so I tried to organize them through a chronological order, having in mind the color, not only the titles, but also the colors that he has used over time. Some of the negatives were destroyed by a flood in the studio and by time, but most of them were really recovered. A few of them were printed, but a few, a dozen or less than a dozen. So this is the last. These are the last years of Portuguese colonialism in India, and he photographs some of these glamorous, I could say, inaugurations. And in the last year, of the last couple of years, there were many inaugurations by the Portuguese, the last governors of Portuguese rule. Allow me to draw your attention to this photograph. As you can see, this is inside a temple, a Hindu temple, and many of these, the audiences sit in chairs. So Amita Kanekar, a scholar, an architect, and a friend who has collaborated in the catalog that I'm I am organizing for this exhibition, which will be launched in Lisbon on next May, 15th of May. She draws the attention to the fact that this is a very, very rare situation. The fact that in a Hindu temple of Goa, like in any temple, Hindu temple of India, the audience is sitting, which result from Portuguese influence, because usually, as you can see here, the audience is sitting on the floor. Again, you have a speech, and again, the audience is seated. Well, and she also draws our attention to the fact that, to another aspects of the intersection between Portuguese, in this case, architecture and Goan architecture, namely, in this case, the deep standa, and how Portuguese Catholic architecture has influenced Hindu temples. But many of these photographs of Ganesh show us Hindu practices, Hindu rituals, like Satyanarayana. This is the first pregnancy of a woman who, as you may know, is celebrated at home. And these are the first years of, well, not the first years, this is Tilak. And it's no doubt the period where the broader Indian movement, nationalist movement, had an impact in Goa and in a way led to some results. I would like to draw your attention to this photograph where you can see many workers. Now, in general terms, as you also are familiar, and Professor Jackson just mentioned it, the work of Felipe Lounge Vicente, unfortunately, there are no Goan collections of photography available, which is, I wouldn't say a mystery. Of course, there must be some family collections, but the dominant collection is by Sozen Paul, a colonial collection, let us say. But there are groups of people that are not in that collection. But Ganesh show us these people, workers, a group which I called, not very originally, subaltern people from different origins. Some of them represent what Parag Parobo has written about, the Bahujan of Goa. Some of them represent Dalits, others represent the tribes of Goa that usually are not represented, not only in Goan photography, because as there is a kind of invisibility covering Goan photography, but it's pretty well represented in this photograph. And well, I only have 20 minutes, so I will not have time before reading my paper to develop something that I have written longer. But allow me to introduce another scholar and friend, Vishvesh Kandolkar. He draws our attention to the fact that when we talk, usually when we consider the Catholic architecture as unique, as original in Goa, we are ignoring the fact that most of the workers are indeed local people that have their own skills, their own art, their own artifacts. So when we are ignoring the fact that these quote-unquote subaltern groups that have not been introduced in the dominant production about art history or other forms of Portuguese narratives indeed played a role, and what we called Catholic or Portuguese architecture, for example, has been deeply influenced by these groups. And of course, as an anthropologist, I'm particularly sensitive to them. Allow me to read what a part of what I've written regarding my presentation today. So I divided my paper in 3 main parts, the first of which I called "To Make the Silence Speak." So this remarkable photographic archive offers a glimpse into nearly 4 decades of dynamic history, capturing this sense of a transformative era. It begins in the late 1950s, as I mentioned, a time when Portuguese colonial rule in India was gradually coming to an end. The collection extends to 1987, more precisely to the visit of President Mário Soares to Goa, a crucial year when Goa was officially designated, as we all know, as a state of India. Through these powerful images, the archive not only preserves but vividly illustrates the region's cultural evolution and the impact of historical events on the lives of its people. The negatives of Krishna Navalkar, Ganesh, reveal a visual framework that encapsulates both Catholic/Portuguese and Hindu/Goan ideas and representation, bringing social and political themes to life. This framework transcends the silence of the image, or as Peter Pell suggested in a different context, makes the silence speak. Indeed, in Ganesh photographs, the depiction of individuals, families, and rituals creates a foundation for conveying knowledge that is largely unwritten and often nonverbal. His photos store and communicate information and memories in a way that defies the constraints of traditional written records. They reveal worlds that have long been overlooked in visual or graphic documentation, allowing us to see them as we break down the conceptual and ideological barriers established by a certain Portuguese historiography regarding Goa. This perspective, which I have referred long ago as quote-unquote Lusocentric, has hindered a more complex narrative about Goa, narrative of Goan history and society. Through Ganesh lens, the collection paves new pathways and opens up fresh perspectives, leading to uncharted configurations and geographies. Ganesh played, therefore, an important and transformative role in illuminating the often overlooked narrative of Portuguese India. Through his evocative photographs, he turned memory into a dynamic battleground where considerations about culture and values unfolded, dominantly colonial ones. In contrast to the dry, one-dimensional histories housed in the archives of colonial institutions, Ganesh's works offers a rich and textured visual experience that presents an alternative history, that one that has been narrated by a dominant Lusocentric history. This history, or is history, is not only accessible to a broader audience, but also free from the constraints and bias of colonial narratives that unfortunately tend to continue nowadays. The collection consists, and I would like to draw your attention to this fact, solely of black and white photographs, creating a timeless aesthetic, even though color photographs were already available in Goa during later stage of Ganesh's work. In her analysis of the Brazilian photographer Sebastião Salgado, whom you may know, Saskia, the anthropologist Saskia Sassen, highlighted a significant distinction between black and white images and their color counterparts. She observed that color photography, particularly when capturing real-life scenes, tend to obscure specific details. The overwhelming richness of color often diminish the viewer's ability to detach from the image, thus limiting opportunities for deeper theoretical reflection. I do believe that we can adopt a similar perspective when analyzing Ganesh photography, and conclude, following Sassen's reasoning, that his photography generates knowledge that goes beyond the visual content of the images themselves. In this sense, his work is heuristic. In how long do I have? 5? Oh my God, so I have to jump. No. I have to jump, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, because it's so fascinating.
So I go to the last part of my approach. I'm so sorry. Anthropology and photography, an archive of memory. So the connection between anthropology and photography has its origins in the early development of ethnographic research. A substantial portion of anthropological research on photography has, however, largely been centered around the colonial archive. Yet, anthropologists have frequently overlooked or undervalued the profound meanings that photography can convey. This lack of recognition has hindered their ability to appreciate how photography can tell complex narratives and present perspectives that extend beyond the colonial framework. By focusing predominantly on the colonial archive, researchers risk adopting a narrow interpretation of photography, thereby neglecting its capacity to capture a diverse array of cultural and social histories. This is something that Shaw identified as what he called, quote unquote, an ontological amputation. This, our photographer, Krishna Navalkar, has refused deeply this ontological amputation. My approach to photo art Ganesh is rooted, therefore, in my background as an anthropologist, despite my lack of formal training in production techniques or critical literature on photography. I view photography through an anthropological lens, believing that it conveys ethnographic information that transcends its visual content. In this sense, photography serves as a heuristic tool, offering insights not only into what is represented in the images, but also into the cultural context and meanings that shape these images. This leads me to suggest that each of Ganesh image carries its own unique qualities that offer perceptions of larger cultural narratives that those that have been offered by written reports, and highlight the ways that various practices shape our visual understanding. As an anthropologist, I am especially attentive to what I would call non-images, the subtle yet significant presences that linger both within the confines of the photograph and in the surrounding context. These elements of shrouded in obscurity offer a glimpse into a more expansive reality that extends the confines of the capture frame. So was Ganesh's invitation to us to go beyond the frames that have been captured by traditional history on the Portuguese relations to India. He, as his photographs, invite us to ponder the deeper stories, connections, and cultural implications that inform the written, of course, but also the visual representations, therefore enriching our understanding of Goan subjects and their environments. Chris Wright had highlighted the narrow scope of Eurocentric perspectives on photography, which often dominate analysis of non-Western cultural contexts. I dare to suggest that Ganesh's profound engagement with Goan society, where he cultivated and he developed his sense of belonging, shield him from the Eurocentric gaze that often constrains other artistic and written productions. In this regard, drawing from Dipesh Chakrabarty's influential concept of provincializing Europe, I imply that Ganesh has effectively provincialized the Portuguese metropolis. Photography, and I'm trying to finish, to wrap up as soon as possible. Photography and memory are intrinsically connected, serving as a focal point where personal experience, collective identity, and cultural narratives intersect. From an anthropological perspective, therefore, for me, photographs are not merely passive records of the past. They function as active agents that shape and influence how memories are constructed. As the passage of time and the unfolding of history have reshaped the meaning of countless images, Ganesh's comprehensive archive stands as a testament to collective memory of Goa and Goans that written narratives have not reported. Over the past 2 decades, efforts to bring to light photographic archives have gained momentum within visual and historical visual anthropology. This process involves investigating both initial connections that form these archives and the subsequent links to other collections. In a sense, by examining various forms of photographic exchange, we can appreciate that all image collections are influenced by a range of factors and exist within a broader visual economies, a term introduced by Deborah Poole. Photographic archives extend beyond mere collection of images. They serve a vibrant spaces of memory, power, and meaning. Excuse me. They reflect broader societal dynamics, illustrating how communities construct and contest their histories and identities. Through a critical analysis of the political, ethical, and temporal dimensions of photographic archives, anthropologists can reveal the intricate processes involved in the preservation and reinterpretation of visual culture. This analysis implies the necessity of rethinking archival practices to foster inclusivity, equity, and agency in representing diverse histories and experiences. The choices made regarding the inclusion or exclusion of specific photographic materials significantly shape how histories are recorded, remembered, and debated. I would dare to suggest that the same applies to the choice made regarding the inclusion or exclusion of documents regarding the relationship between India and Portugal, or Goa and Portugal. Going back to photography, integrating photography into archives transforms ephemeral moments into enduring records, effectively bridging the transient and the permanent. Anthropologist Elizabeth Edwards highlighted the dual role of photography as both evidence and emotional expression. Photographs function as documentary objects that appear to capture reality while simultaneously invoking emotional and symbolical meanings. In archival context, the significance of photographs is further enhanced by institutional processes of categorization, preservation, and retrieval. I sincerely believe that this collection, as well as other photographic collections that so far seem to be in obscurity in Goa, can contribute to a better illustration of the relations, the long time forged relations between Portugal and Goa. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. That was a really stimulating start to the panel. I'm sure we're going to be many, many questions. May I now request our second speaker, Irene Silveira Almeida, yeah, who is assistant. Okay.
Where do I go?
Who is assistant professor in the discipline of French and Francophone studies at Goa University. Her doctoral work looked at integration in the context of the Goan French diaspora. Her interdisciplinary research work draws from diverse domains such as diaspora and cultural studies, sociolinguistics, French and Francophone literature, teaching methodology, and Goa studies. Today she speaks to us on Portuguese influences in the French Goan diaspora, thereby broadening and giving us yet another lens into looking at Goa. Thank you. So may I?
Good afternoon. Let me begin by thanking right at the outset the organizers for giving me this opportunity to present on a topic that is very dear to my heart, the French Goan diaspora. While my earlier work has looked at various aspects of their integration, notably both social as well as linguistic, and also the role of social networks in mitigating settlement stress. Here I choose to focus on their colonial roots, notably the Portuguese influences on the French Goan diaspora. Now, the French Goan diaspora that we are looking at migrated to Paris from the 1960s onwards, so that's in the final years of Goan colonial rule out here, and soon thereafter. And they represent a unique interaction of colonial legacies, linguistic adaptability, and cultural resilience. This study highlights how colonial histories shaped migration patterns and facilitated cross-cultural adaptability, allowing Goans to carve out a distinct yet assimilated identity within the French socio-cultural landscape. My paper uses online video footage, documentary evidence, and testimonials from community members to trace the diaspora settlement and adaptation process, focusing on their Indo-Portuguese heritage and intergenerational negotiation of identity. Hence, I'm looking and divided the paper into three main segments. Firstly, I look at the migration pathway, which is Goa to Paris via Portugal. Secondly, I will delve into cultural adaptation. And lastly, as I conclude, I will also give a small aperçu on the identity and intergenerational perspectives across both generations. So to begin with the migration pathway, the migration of Goans to Paris in the post-1960s period was deeply intertwined, of course, with the Portuguese colonial heritage. After Goa's integration into India, some Goans they opted for Portuguese nationality because this was a status that provided them with a European passport and access to opportunities within the European economic community. For many Goans, Portugal served as either a direct entry point to Europe or a transitional stop. Some migrants also passed through Portuguese-dominated and administered territories in Africa, such as Mozambique or Angola, where they had lived and worked before relocating to France. Those who had spent time in Portuguese Africa were often fluent in Portuguese and carried a strong sense of cultural affinity with the Portuguese way of life. Now, the Goa-Paris migration, to give you a bit of a context, saw two major waves. The initial one in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and a later one from the 90s onwards, before being subsumed into the 21st century Goa-UK migration that we are more familiar with. The early Goan settlers in Paris hailed from Siridão and Agaçaí villages along the Zoari River, villages that, along with neighboring Goa Velha, Taligaon, Caranzalém, provided the bulk of Goan migration before eventually spreading to the rest of Goa through word of mouth. The initial settlers were young men who moved from Siridão, Agaçaí towards Europe in search of better opportunities, since the fishing villages they hailed from offered no viable economic outlets at the time. They landed in Portugal and were confronted with the Salazarist regime. Severely impacted by the military conscription and the Portuguese colonial conflicts in Africa, they sought a way out of service. Some served for a few months or even years before finally managing a way out into neighboring France. There are narratives of the traumatic crossing over from the Portuguese northern frontier into Spain and eventually France that punctuate the accounts of older male migrants. Details are not much provided, and the silences in their narratives speak louder than words, pointing to hard choices in the face of adversity, and harsh migration journeys survived through solidarity, camaraderie, and sometimes just good fortune. These men often returned to Goa in search of a spouse or settled with sisters of fellow Goan migrants through selective matchmaking. Thus was born the nucleus of the community with origins in Siridão, Agaçaí that then expanded through kinship and neighborhood ties. It's interesting to note that with the passage of time, the Goan community in Paris came to include members from across Goa, which were essentially economic migrants, no longer fleeing from Portuguese repressive regimes. In the later years, migrants were deliberately seeking out Paris as a destination, especially in the wake of the economic boom in France in the 70s and 80s, and they used Portugal merely as a stopover for administrative reasons. Now, once they were in Paris, Goans frequently benefited from their identification as Portuguese immigrants, a group that had already established a positive reputation in the French society. France had already welcomed many Portuguese immigrants in the 20th century, and the French population was familiar with people of Portuguese descent. The Portuguese community was well integrated, particularly in service-oriented roles, and since most Goans of the early migration also took up similar jobs, taking care of residential spaces as concierge or working as babysitters, cooks, caretakers, cleaners, servers, restaurant and hotel staff, this alignment of occupational niches enabled Goans to blend into their new environment seamlessly. The cultural parallels between the two groups further facilitated this integration. Additionally, as we know, the Goans had Portuguese first names and surnames, and this further contributed to their amalgamation into the Portuguese migrant community as would have been perceived by French natives. Now, language acquisition played a crucial role in the diaspora settlement process in France because we know out there French knowledge functioned as a vehicle for economic and social advancement and was highly essential. Many first-generation Goan migrants had some familiarity with Portuguese, either through formal education in Goa's Escola Primária or the Liceu, or informally through interactions in a Goa that until then was largely Lusophone. This prior exposure to a Romance language like Portuguese often simplified the process of learning French, which was an inherent challenge in the initial years. They often also had the experience of having learned some written French in school in Goa, either as part of school education under the colonial system or soon thereafter in independent Goa. These linguistic capabilities in Portuguese and or French, even if they were limited at times, allowed Goans to integrate linguistically into French society more easily. And over time, even those who initially spoke only Konkani adapted by learning French, demonstrating remarkable linguistic flexibility. In this process, they were aided by the French community through free or paid language courses, as well as through unstructured support provided by French neighbors, parishioners, workmates, and even their very own children who grew to be proficient in the language to the extent of turning native French speakers having been born and or schooled in France. Cuisine was another significant marker of Indo-Portuguese cultural continuity within the French Goan diaspora. Traditional dishes such as vindalho, sorpotel, cafrial, chouriço, armas, carne assada, that is, pulao, samousage, risoj, bibinka, bolos, etc., were staples of weekend meals and community gatherings. These recipes, as we well know, reflect the blending of Indian and Portuguese culinary traditions, and they became a means of preserving Goan identity. Food thus served as a bridge, connecting Goans with their heritage while facilitating social cohesion. Religion and Catholic practices further reinforced Goan integration into French society. The Goan diaspora's Catholic upbringing, with its emphasis on devotion to the Virgin Mary and the Goan village parochial saints, resonated with both Portuguese and French religious traditions, leading to facilitated acceptance by the local host community. Local Parisian parishes became central to community life, providing spaces for worship, but also socialization and transmission of cultural values to younger generations. Through active participation in parish life in Paris, the Goans drew upon a support system that oriented them both linguistically and socially. The diaspora's special veneration of Saint Francis Xavier, a Jesuit missionary from the Basque area who played a pivotal role in Portuguese Goa of the 16th century and who left an enduring legacy, underscored their deep connection to their Indo-Portuguese roots. The Saint Francis Xavier feast, celebrated on a Sunday in December in Paris, continues to bring together the French Goan community, conferring on the feast the status of a community builder. Like the Portuguese diaspora, the Goan diaspora is also involved in Marian pilgrimages, notably to Lourdes in France and to Fatima in Portugal. Both communities typically try to inculcate family values and religiosity in children, stressing on sacraments and Catholic socio-cultural practices as motors of inter-community cohesion. The Goan diaspora's identity has evolved over time, shaped by the interplay of Portuguese, Goan, and French influences. Now, first-generation migrants generally identified as Goan, often assuming Indo-Portuguese facets of identity, reflecting thus their colonial heritage and cultural ties to Portugal. In comparison, the second generation often downplayed these elements in favor of a predominantly French identity, while remaining deeply conscious of their origins, which they chose to designate as Goan and in some cases Indian. This dual identity was often expressed through their participation in cultural events, family gatherings, and community activities that celebrated Goan traditions. The preservation of ethnic ties was seen as a way of honoring their parents' legacy while providing moorings to navigating life in a multicultural society. Across both generations, the first and the second, we observed an overwhelming expression of gratitude for the opportunities that Portuguese nationality afforded them, including the ability to migrate and settle in Europe with relative ease. They acknowledged their Portuguese heritage in mitigating settlement stress and paving the way for smoother integration through similarity with the Portuguese immigrant community. They strove to maintain close-knit family structures and sought to preserve Goan traditions within their households. And hence, in conclusion, we would say that the French Goan diaspora exemplifies how colonial histories and cultural adaptability can shape migration and settlement experiences. The paper examined the Portuguese influences on this diasporic group, contextualizing their migration journey from Goa, once a Portuguese colony, through Portugal or Portuguese-administered territories in Africa to eventually settling in Paris. The linguistic, cultural, and religious continuities between Goans and Portuguese immigrants eased their transition and facilitated their acceptance within France. At the same time, the Goan diaspora's efforts to maintain their Indo-Portuguese heritage ensured the transmission of a rich cultural heritage to future generations. The Goan experience thus underscores the enduring impact of colonial histories on recent migration patterns and highlights the importance of cultural resilience and cross-cultural adaptability in navigating complex diasporic realities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm sure there are going to be several questions. I may now request Dr. Maria da Costa Rodriguez to come and speak to us on something which is a bit unfair before lunch. It's a study of some Goan Catholic dishes. She's been Assistant State Librarian in the State Central Library in Goa, holds a Master's in History and a Master's in Library and Information Science, a State Cultural Awardee of 2017, Itihas Parishad Konkani, 2019, among others. She's published several books and publications. So I welcome you again to come and speak to us about culinary practices.
Good afternoon to all of you. Thanks for the introduction, Professor Subramaniam, and thanks for the organizers for inviting me for this conference. A study of some Goan Catholic dishes. I'll have to also cut down a little bit on my presentation because the 15 minutes that's given to those presenting the paper. The intimate links between food practices and the embodiment of identity and between commerciality and politics make the domain of food an important arena for the working out of colonial struggles over the colonization of consciousness and strategies of appropriation and resistance. Indeed, it is reasonable to assert both that contemporary foodways and identities around the world are in large measures the product of a long history of colonial encounters, and that reciprocally, food has been a consistently prominent material medium for the enactment of colonialism. Goan cuisine has been influenced by the various rulers who governed the region over the centuries. However, there has been little in-depth study or archaeological research on food consumption. Our understanding of traditional Goan dishes, such as rice with curry and fish, or rice with legumes and vegetables, has been passed down through references to the region's culinary traditions. The Portuguese colonial rule, which spanned 450 years, had the most enduring impact on Goan cuisine, leaving a legacy that continues to shape it today. My paper focused on the study of select Goan Catholic dishes which were introduced by the Portuguese. This introduction occurred gradually and include dishes such as sarapatel, cabidela, assado, vinha d'alho, balsão, feijoada, and cafrial, among others, both savory and sweet. Today, these dishes are commonly featured on Goan restaurant menus, often without any mention of their origins. Additionally, originally from many were also from other colonies. For instance, balsão originates from Macau and cafrial from Mozambique. What is intriguing is how the preparation of dishes has evolved from their original form, significantly altering both their preparations and taste. This transformation is largely due to the addition of various spices to cater to local preferences. Take balsam, for example, and how it has been adapted in the preparation of other dishes. Originally a sauce used to cook fish, prawns, and meat, balsam is made by grinding a mix of spices with palm, feni, and fine shrimp known as galmo and konkani. When fish or meat is cooked with this sauce, it becomes a dish traditionally served with bread or rice. In Goa, there is also a variation called balsam de bilimbis, made from a sour fruit found in many households, which is cooked with prawns and spices and served as a pickle. Another version, prawn balsam, is a popular pickle made with prawns. This delicacy is often carried by expats on their travels and is made by locals to serve as an appetizer or accompaniment. Cafrial originated in Africa and was introduced to Goan restaurants in the 50s when African troops were stationed in Goa. It is believed that the African soldiers seeking to supplement their income began working in local restaurants where they introduced the dish. Initially, it wasn't as popular as it is today, where nearly every restaurant offers their own version, though none serves the original. Similarly, feijoada was added to the restaurant menus around the same time. This was made possible by Portuguese soldiers who worked as cooks to earn extra money. The dish gradually gained popularity after Goa's liberation. The Goan vinha d'alho, also known as vindalho or vindalu, was introduced to the British by Goan cooks employed in their household. Originally a dish prepared by the privileged, it was less common than sarapatel. The dish traveled across continents with British and Indian chefs, with some creating their own variations. In a television program broadcast in the USA, one Indian chef explained that the name Vindaloo comes from it including aloo, meaning potato in the recipe. And one gentleman comes and said, I have to ask you a question. I said, what happened? You can ask me here. No, see, the program, the chef said Vindaloo was potato. I said, you don't have to ask me, definitely. There's no potato in Vindaloo. I don't know if they add somewhere in Azores. No. Anyway, so in most restaurants in Goa, chicken cafrial is a staple on the menu. However, Goan Catholic restaurants typically offer a wider variety of dishes such as sarapatel, assad, vindalho, and even feijoada in addition to cafrial. To my knowledge, no restaurant serves cabidela anymore, as it has disappeared from the Goan table. Both cabidela and sarapatel were traditionally festive foods. Though today, due to tourism and a growing demand for Goan cuisine, sarapatel is available year-round. A well-stocked supermarket near Panjim even sells many of these dishes across the counter. But why has cabidela fallen out of favor? Is it because it is considered elitist or due to its ingredients? Both cabidela and sarapatel require the use of blood and fresh blood, and which is mixed with vinegar and added during cooking. Cabidela is a Portuguese dish made with rice, poultry, or game meat and animal blood, commonly enjoyed in northern Portugal, Brazil, and even Angola. While the Portuguese version often uses hen, lamb, or duck, Goans prepared it with pigling or duck, paired with goan bread like sannas, which was also a formal festive dish. For some reason, kabdiyal never gained the same popularity as sarapatel among food lovers. What remains of Portuguese influence in these dishes is primarily their names. The Goan versions of cabidela, sarapatel, and other Portuguese-influenced dishes have evolved into distinct recipes that are unique to the Goan community, often reserved for festive occasions. What makes this dish uniquely Goan? While the Portuguese version typically uses a few basic condiments like garlic, pepper, and bay leaf, the Goan version incorporates a wider range of spices. For instance, the Portuguese sarapatel is made with blood and only includes garlic, pepper, and bay leaf, while the Goan version includes an array of spices such as chilies, garlic, ginger, cumin, turmeric, pepper, cloves, and cinnamon, all ground together into a paste. The renowned book on Portuguese cuisine, O Livro de Pantagruel, which has multiple editions, features a recipe for sarapatel Goan sarapatel. Traditionally, Goan sarapatel was made with blood, although many have opted to exclude it in recent preparations. I will discuss sarapatel, a dish introduced by the colonizers for national pride or colonial consciousness, and is now regarded as a representative dish of the colonized Goan community and its diaspora. It is not an everyday food, but rather a celebratory dish. Many first-generation immigrants maintain strong ties with their place of origin through family, friends, remittances, participation in cultural events, and occasional visits. However, migrant culinary traditions often evolve independently, influenced by new contexts, external pressures, and internal dynamics, which may differ from those of the original cuisine. In the case of Goans who migrated to neighboring British India and African colonies, such interaction did not occur. To illustrate this, I will focus on the Goan community in Mozambique, particularly in Beira, where such culinary shifts are not observed. In a study by Marta Villar Rosales, she interviewed Goans who had migrated from Mozambique to Portugal after the African country's independence to understand the significance of preparing exclusively Goan food. One interviewee shared, I quote, "On feast days, it was unthinkable not to prepare only Goan cuisine. We made pulao rice, which is rich in raisin, almonds, and fried onions, and chicken cut into pieces, along with sarapatel, a traditional Christmas dish. Goan food is truly excellent and has a rich heritage. It was a must." Unquote. This statement highlights the interviewer's note that sarapatel is considered a traditional Christmas dish. After Mozambique gained independence in 1975, many Goans migrated to Portugal, where they continued to prepare both everyday and festive dishes. This was made easier by enterprising Indians who established Lojas de Indianos, Indian stores, especially in Lisbon, where ingredients for Asian cuisines were readily available. From 2000 onwards, Goans from Beira began organizing annual reunions called Encontros dos Goeses da Beira, the reunions of the Goans of Beira. At these gatherings, Goan food was served to attendees, with sarapatel becoming the signature dish for the event, often featured at supper. I had the opportunity to attend one such full-day event in May 2017 as a guest of my relative. The event began with snacks such as Goan croquettes and samosas, followed by a Portuguese lunch served at the table. After an afternoon of music and dancing, supper was served buffet style with sarapatel as the main dish, eagerly anticipated and enjoyed by those present. There were many ladies who came with their boxes also to take away whatever was left on the table. There is another thesis by a dissertation for the master's by Maria Lucinda Fernandes Costa Fernandes, and the title is Os Encontros dos Goeses da Beira e seus amigos na Grande Lisboa, patrimônio identitário e sua reconstrução cultural pós-colonial. In this, she included in the appendices listing the menus for these annual reunions. Over a 10-year period, that's her study period, sarapatel was served at every event except one and remains the main dish for supper. The event organizers even highlight the dish in their publicity, emphasizing that sarapatel will be served, that is, avera sarapatel. Yeah. The conflict between Portuguese and Goan kitchens arose when Portuguese cuisine became integrated into Goan family tradition, often clashing with the distinct Goan tastes. This integration involved adapting the dishes to the use of local spices, vegetables, and fruit. We have already seen this with dishes like sarapatel, cabidel, and other Portuguese foods in Goa, and the diaspora community followed a similar path. Researchers found that the families interviewed did not view the incorporation of Portuguese influences into the Goan gastronomic heritage as a threat to its richness and authenticity. Goans adapted Portuguese cuisine to their own preferences, creating a culinary tradition that, while retaining the original names, often diverged significantly from the original recipes, sometimes even altering the spelling. This approach contrasts sorry, with the British, who gradually encouraged Indian cooks to modify and simplify their dishes to suit British taste. A nostalgic poem, Analogy to Sarapatel, illustrates how deeply it is woven into our culture and tradition. This tribute was written by Philip Furtado, who lived in Bombay. In the poem Sarapatel, he not only reflects on his memories of Sarapatel, but also highlights its essential accompaniments, the local sanna, the bread, and Goan cajofeni. I will just read the poem. In praise of Sarapatel, for the hodgepodge known as haggis, let Scotchmen yearn or yell. 1 minute. The computer's, not getting the second line. Yeah, just a minute. If you can get the second line here. Yeah, okay, fine, thank you. So for the hodgepodge, for the hodgepodge known as haggis, let Scotchmen yearn or yell. On the taste of Yorkshire pudding, let the English fondly dwell. Their famed tandoori chicken, let Punjabis praise like hell. But for us who hail from Goa, there is not like Sarapatel. From our big wigs in Colaba to our small fry in Parel, from our growing tribe in Bandra to our remnants in Cavell, from our working girls at Glaxos to our boys in Burmashell, there is none whose mouth won't water when you talk of Sarapatel. And oh, for Christmas dinner, don't you think it would be swell if, thanks to a freak of fortune or by some magic spell, we could, as they can in Goa, have a bottle of kajal and toddy leaven sadhana to go with Sarapatel. Yeah, this is his eulogy. And what I want to say is that all the colonizers want to introduce, it's easy to colonize, to introduce their culture through food. Portugal tried to do that. But have they been successful, or we have used, I won't use the word appropriate because it could be derogatory, but assimilated the Sarapatel to be our own representative. I once call it again a national food because our national food would be rice and curry and fish, but this would be representative of the Goan people. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, we have the last speaker for this panel, and I'm very delighted to invite Professor Edward Cook Jr., who is the Charles Montgomery Professor of American Decorative Arts in the History of Art Department at Yale University. He focuses on material culture and decorative arts from the 16th century to the present. At Yale, he teaches lecture courses on American material culture from the 15th century to the present, as well as an introductory course on global decorative arts, and offers seminars on a variety of topics, including material cultural theory, embodied artisanal knowledge, the American interior, American furniture, and modern craft. Today he speaks to us on material culture of old Goa in the 16th and 17th centuries.
There we go. Well, first of all, I want to thank David Jackson and the Council for Latin American and Iberian Studies at Yale for inviting a trespasser into this domain. Well, I mean, recent trespasser, I guess. And also for the people at Goa University for doing such a great job organizing this endeavor, and particularly to Drew for all his work to make our life a whole lot easier. Now, when Portugal, when Portugal made Goa the capital of its Asian territories in 1510, the settlement became an important focal point for regional and global trade. It served as the key layover port for the 2-year voyage between Lisbon and Nagasaki, where merchant ships paused for a change in winds, waiting for the monsoon to switch, for sailors, where sailors recovered from the arduous trip that brought them either from Lisbon or from Nagasaki or Macau, and where ship stores were reprovisioned for the next long leg of the trip. As it became the capital of the Estado da India in 1533, its role as an entrepot, administrative center, and center of the lucrative gem trade, particularly diamonds, attracted goods and artisans from throughout the area. The result was a material world fueled by the minority Portuguese administrators, religious leaders, and traders, the growing local elite and traders, and then realized by artisans from throughout the region who worked in distinctive hybrid forms. Works in wood and silver and ceramic tiles testify to Goa's vitality and its wealth in the second half of the 16th and the 17th century, an era that I would describe as being proto-colonial in many ways, that the colonial situation had not really taken firm kind of control. Now, works by Paulo Varela Gomez and Inez Zupanoff demonstrate the growth of mission churches during this period, when they went from direct borrowing of European forms and details to a boom in building as orders competed with one another and drew in Christianized and non-Christian artisans to create material translations, seen particularly in the pulpits where Nagas and Naginis, who were snake-like spirits who resided in rivers, underground, or in trees, represented the local underworld and replaced and substituted the caryatids, the mermaids, and other European creatures of the period. And just giving you a sense of some of these underlying supports, brackets for these pulpits, in which you can see the Naginis. It's a very distinctive kind of creature that really serves as a local assertion of a particular kind of spirituality. If you look at this period of hybridity, of incorporating these local forms, it really lasted into the early 18th century, when pulpits returned again to very traditional European forms, basically based right out of design books. The furniture from this period also represents this similar melding of material ideas. And here I wanted to sort of work off of some of the pioneering work by Maria Pinto. Cabinets in churches oftentimes featured brass nails as a decorative device, large, pierced, gilt brass escutcheons, that is, pulls for the drawers, contrasting dark wood inlay. These sorts of elements were not really pure Portuguese, but actually were oftentimes the result of different kinds of forms and ornament that are being introduced into Goa by people throughout the Indian Ocean world, as well as the extent over into the China Sea, Indonesia, and Southeast Asia. There are multiple connections as you look at forms and ornament. There are Portuguese kinds of connections seen within sort of this idea of a raised cabinet on stand, the pierced brass escutcheons, the kind of scrolled legs that you see in the table on the right. You find connections with the case furniture from the Gujarat area up in northwest of Goa, particularly thinking about these arcaded lower sections, again, using of scrolled feet, oftentimes having creatures who are bearing the weight of these particular sorts of cabinets. And again, sort of thinking about drawers, cabinets of drawers, something that is adapted from European forms, but actually presented in a very distinct way in Goa. The use of veneers, of cut up thin pieces of wood to create wooden pictorial images on these particular cabinets. You find that as you look at some of these distinctions, it becomes really important to look at the types of woods as well as the construction features. And particularly what brings some of these case furniture pieces from Gujarat in tight conversation with the work in Goa is to look at the joining of the drawer sides to the drawer front, which oftentimes has these flat dovetails that are pinned, as you see in the upper left sort of image. Look at that pin that's not just relying on glue for that joint, of having dovetails on the back, of using wooden pins on the underside to secure the drawer bottoms into these drawers, not using nails, but actually using wooden sorts of materials. Something that's distinct as you look at things coming from Sri Lanka, where they're using ivory pins to secure much of the same areas. As I said, pictorial sorts of inlay, not inlay, but veneers that create these pictures using light and dark colored woods. These are Gujarati sorts of images that oftentimes depict people, animals, etc., that they're really related to the kinds of imagery that are seen in miniature paintings as well. You find that it's not just Gujarat that's in conversation. Cochin, to the south of Goa, there's a tradition there, again, of these veneers, light and dark contrast, but oftentimes large fields that you see in the left. But again, sort of using these kinds of scroll feet of flat stretchers, those horizontal pieces between legs that are shaped to look like they are turned rather than being sawn out the way they are here. There are relationships, for instance, with tables that are being produced in Japan as well, Nagasaki, that are lacquered on top of cypress, that are building up some of these same forms. And it's this kind of world that is coming through these objects. These artisans are looking at the work from one another's region to then combine them. And one can think about writing cabinets, a lot of this portable furniture, which actually becomes the easy way to convey some of these forms and decoration. And even the ways in which the example on the left of Japanese lacquer work, the dense kind a lacquer of gold leaf, silver leaf sprinkled into the building up of the lacquer. It's incredibly dense. If you look at local Japanese lacquer of the period, it uses much more of the black background. And here what you find is sort of the lacquerers working in Nagasaki catering specifically to a Portuguese taste of, one would say, blingy kind of work, rather than the kind of more austere work that is being produced for the temples and local clients in Japan. And I mention this because if you look at what's being produced in Gujarat, in Goa, where you've got that same sort of use of veneer, of marquetry, of creating wood pictures, but what you find is this incredible density of light and dark. And I think this is what the Japanese lacquerers are looking at and saying, this is what the Portuguese like. We're going to produce this for these Japanese who are coming to Nagasaki, and that kind of communication that's going back and forth. I also want to draw your attention here to some of the imagery that's being used. And what you'll see is the lion's face with foliage arranged around it. And this is something that's particularly important in South and Southeast Asia with the idea of the kirtimuka. That is the face of glory that is used as an architectural feature, oftentimes in carving, but here is represented in this flat marquetry tradition that I think, again, speaks to this whole notion of local language being important, of asserting one's own story in the same way that nagini are being used in the pulpits during this period. And start thinking about the ways in which the Goan artisans are drawing. They might be from some of these different areas, but they're drawing on local kinds of perspectives. And I think you can start to see it as well, not simply, again, with this light and dark marquetry, but if you look at the supports, the columns in the lower part of this, and these are some of the, you see some that are much more nagini-like, sort of with a mermaid tail to it, but this is something different. This is something that actually is borrowing from African traditions, and where you find female figures with disproportionate heads, holding one's breasts, which actually speak to this whole idea of holding on to secrets, and oftentimes with scarification. And the Luba in sort of Democratic Congo Republic, now in the 19th century, were very well known for this kind of work. And I think that what you need to do is look at this and start thinking about, it's not simply Gujarat, as well as Cochin, as well as Japan, but actually Eastern Africa is also a very important part of the kind of language of ornament and form, of putting these sorts of figures in supporting kinds of roles. And if you start to think about putting a female figure and why it becomes so important within the Luba world, it's about the idea of female sacred authority. And again, I think that you can see this as a non-Christian kind of way of asserting identity within these particular pieces. Again, sort of thinking about some of the flattening of these, so that instead of having something in the round, you twist it so you've got this frontal sawn out kind of profile that we'd seen on some of the tables. This gives you a sense of how, instead of within the Luba kind of wooden carvings, the scarification would be carved. Here, what you're doing is using brass nails to accentuate different kinds of ways of expressing these sorts of worlds. And I think that you start to look at this, this is not a nagini. This is something quite a bit different. And just to sort of draw this distinction out, if you look at some of the later African versions, you start to see this exact similar kind of convention. And again, instead of having carved scarification, of the use of brass nails as a way of marking different points on the female body. Again, what you find are these connections to the Gujarati material in terms of the same exact drawer construction, a pinning of drawer bottoms that I think speaks to some of the artisans who are going back and forth between Gujarat and Goa. It's not as if people are only in Goa, but I think people are moving throughout the Indian Ocean world. And again, instead of having figural kinds of marquetry, that is the building up of these fields of lighting and dark contrasting woods, much of the work in Goa is either sort of that lion's face with seaweedy kind of work around it, or this very geometric kind of work that you find patterning here. And again, oftentimes these thicker bands along the outside being pinned into place. This is very different than what you'd find in European work, where most of it is just glued down and doesn't have this high degree of sophistication. Even the ways in which forms are borrowing. The vento, that is a small kind of box that has a side door that opens up and has drawers inside of it. It's a Japanese form, but here it's being replicated in Goa. So ideas and objects are going in both directions. Both the Japanese looking at Goan material as ideas for lacquer, Japanese forms being shipped to Goa on the way back, and influencing the kinds of forms that you see in Goa. Again, the lion's face, lion's head, something that goes back into Sindh culture up in the north, has this long history that is being incorporated. It's not simply the use of sort of a Habsburgian double lion, double eagle, or using some sort of European tradition, but it's actually coming from a South Asian tradition. And just, the fact that I think that some of this material is being ordered by local Portuguese people who are passing through Goa, or maybe posted there for a short amount of time, but I actually think that there's others that don't have coats of arms, et cetera, that are marquetry put into it, but actually are for some of the local elite as well. And just finally, sort of talking about these forms, it's amazing how much of this work survives from the late 16th and 17th century. That I think speaks to the vitality of Goa at this particular point in time. If we were to turn to silver, it's another one of these kinds of trades that is particularly important in Goa because of the gem trade and the fact that you need to oftentimes do mounts for these gems. And so that the silver is something that becomes well known throughout South Asia. And here the work of Nuno Vassalo Silva, particularly his 2015 Jewels from the India run, reveals this other kind of complex network that places Goa at the center of this sprawling network. You find that, for instance, a lot of the tortoiseshell caskets that are being produced up in Gujarat, where the tortoiseshell is being harvested, are sent down to Goa and then given silver mounts. That is, all the kind of hardware, hasps, et cetera, that sort of give it, protect the edges of it and dress it up as the super object of this particular point in time. And what it does is it showcases a lot of the work in Goa at this point, incredibly sophisticated for repoussé chasing, that is, deep modeling of the silver through hammerwork. The hammerwork is also evident in a lot of religious material that, again, is being produced for these competing kinds of orders in Goa as well as in Cochin, but a lot of it being produced, again, here in Goa. Where would you want to sort of show your best work? It's in the reliquary casket of Francis Xavier. And these are highlight pieces that really speak to the trade of local indigenous Goan silversmiths, monstresses, et cetera. It's also interesting that oftentimes people tend to think about filigree work as being something that's very specific to Goa, that is the use of very thin silver wire. You draw it through a plate and then manipulate it into this kind of very transparent kind of volume for such objects as caskets. But in fact, it's actually, once again, a much more complex story, that this kind of open work filigree was not distinctively Goan, but is actually characteristic of the whole area. There's evidence of Islamic influence through Hormuz, the great trading port in the Arab Peninsula, or perhaps Chinese influence through the Fujian province, where Chinese merchants were well known for moving goods throughout this area, and even Manila. So you look at filigree caskets, this is something that are being produced throughout this broader kind of world, the world outside of the Atlantic and European circuit. Here's a Goan example based very closely on some of the types that were being circulated in the trade in the region. and then how it becomes sort of adapted and localized in terms of tazas, that is sort of platters, as well as caskets, smaller caskets for the local trade. And finally, tiles also indicated this kind of varied source of what you would refer to as reverse translation, not just sort of a trickle down from colonial center to the periphery, but churches contain examples of both Islamic fritware tiles as well as Portuguese azuelos, that is tin glazed earthenware tiles, but used in Mughal conventions, that is as walls of carpet in essence. And one needs to really pay attention to the materials, the pattern motifs, and display strategies. And here I look at the work of Alexandra Curvello, who argues that the competition between the Jesuits, who were oriented more towards East Asia, and then the Augustinians, who focused more on the northern domains of the Mughal Empire, the Safavids, seen in their mission north in 1602 and 3, contributed to these choices. And you can see it within some of the churches and convents in Goa, where you've got, on the one hand, the use of azuelos here, but also fritware tiles. And fritware has a very distinctive kind of lemon peely glazed surface to it, and the ways in which the cobalt blue and other colors are built up with minerals. So there's actually a relief to these particular tiles as opposed to the Portuguese kind of painted, flat painted tiles. And even the ways in which these, the evidence of them still can be seen of the azuelos, but looking at some of these different patterns where they're used as accent panels, as carpetry, sort of going up walls, such as you see here, is something that comes right out of this Mughal tradition. If you look at Agra, for instance, and start to see some of the same patterns being used there, I think it becomes so important to see these correlations not simply as Lisbon's effect on, or Portugal's effect on Goa, but actually how Goa is at the center of this other kind of network. And I think that notion of getting rid of, and this is where, thinking about Rosa's notion, to get rid of the concept of Indo-Portuguese material culture. The very term Indo-Portuguese is so problematic. And it's simplistic and it's Euro-based on the concept of Portuguese expansion. And instead, I think what we need to do is recenter our perspective and focus upon Goa itself as a center of overlapping networks, thousands of miles away from the so-called administrative center. Think about, it would take 8 months to sail from Lisbon to Goa if everything went well. Certainly not the way airlines work today. And that the religious orders focused upon certain other regions and competing with one another, that there were Portuguese, Armenian, and Indian Ocean traders who were jockeying for distinctive goods or markets. There were artisans who were seeking new opportunities, migrating to seek out different ways to go, or perhaps they were recruited by some of these elite to come and produce their work. Or even local Goans who were trying, artisans and clients who were trying to figure out the most advantageous kinds of alliances that they can make to improve their lives. I was thinking back to the conference that David alluded to that took place at Yale in November. And Ananya Kabir, she and I were on the same panel. It was a wonderful kind of dialogue. And she referred to the term of swirling to describe this kind of creolization, which is a term that usually gets applied to the Caribbean. But actually, can we use this idea of swirling in a proto or non-colonial world, which is in essence what's going on in Goa in the Indian Ocean in the late 16th and then the 17th century. So those are just, I wanted to abbreviate it and make it quick. I can explain more on the masterclass on Wednesday if people want it. But thank you very much.
Thank you. Any suggestions from the organizers about time? Can we have at least 10 minutes? No? we've got to move up. Okay, I then have to just thank my speakers for really a stimulating panel. I had several questions, but they knew the lunch. Thank you again.
Thank you very much to all the panelists for a very varied and stimulating session, both visually and intellectually. May I request at this point Professor Koshi Tarakan, Dean, School of International and Area Studies, and co-convener of today's event, to kindly come up on the dais so we can have a presentation of mementos to all the panelists. Yes, we'll start with the panel chair, Professor Lakshmi Subramanian. Professor Rosa Maria Perez. Dr. Irene Silveira. Dr. Maria Lourdes Bravo da Costa. And Professor Edward Cook, Jr. So without further ado, I'm going to ask, oh yes, we'll take a quick group picture, but I think in the meanwhile, we are going to take a lunch break and get back here by 2:30. So we'll be back here for the post-lunch session at 2:30 sharp. Thank you, everyone.